Uh, Good morning, everybody. We are doing The Grave of Brian Jones, probably my favourite Rolling Stone. Incredibly red. It's hay fever. I'm not dying. Shouldn't make a joke like that in a place like this, should I? So Brian Jones was the person that got the Rolling Stones together. He put an advert in the paper, very famous story, and Keith Richards answered it. But yeah, he's from this area, and it said he left this area like late 50s, I want to say 1959. I thought I was a snake. So I will stress, I should have said this at this beginning, like a lot of the graves I go to, I do a lot of research because I don't really know much about them. Brian Jones, I was very into Brian Jones's era Rolling Stones at about 20, and I did lots of research and reading about Brian Jones at a young age, so I'm not done any research, I'm delving into that knowledge. But yeah, it said he got a girl pregnant in Cheltenham, and he was trying to force through the abortion. Abortion are a very strong talking point at the moment in the world. Nobody should have any choice over anybody else's body, is my opinion. But Brian Jones was trying to force her to have an abortion, and she didn't. And she brought the baby to pregnancy. And Brian Jones has 4 children. I think only 2 of them he ever had any contact with. I think one he never knew he had. He's a questionable character, Brian Jones. He's an enigma. He's an interesting person to research and learn about because he's a genius as well. But he kind of left this area in disgrace and just travelled around Europe for a bit, just busking away. He's an incredibly talented guitarist, and when he came back penniless, he went to London, and that's where he put the advert in. So I think it was the Bricklayers Arms is the pub. I'll put a little link. I did a Beatles walk and I'll go past that pub. I think it's on Duck Lane in London if you want to see it, where the Rolling Stones first kind of formed and got together. But yeah, like I said, the Rolling Stones were a cover band. That's what they did, that's what they were, that's what Brian Jones envisaged them doing, an R&B blues band. After Jagger and Richards joined, Bill Wyman joined, and then Charlie Watts was the last to join. Brian Jones, as the Rolling Stones became successful, was a user of drugs and alcohol, and he had after the person he left, who he had a kid with, he had another partner if memory serves, and then as the Rolling Stones were getting big, he kind of totally ditched her. Questionable man. And he had lots of rock and roll celebrities. He was one of the faces, not the band, just one of the people about town in London. He loved that lifestyle, but it was having an impact on the band, and Jagger and Richards were getting a bit, well, I think all the members were saying he's a bit of a tit when he had a few. He's like horrible. That's what they say. He was like just a nasty man when he was off it. Oh, Brian Jones is here. There's an American flag on the bench and alcohol. Oh, it's a bench for Brian Jones. Let me show you. Dedicated to the memory of Brian Jones, founder of the Rolling Stones, from the members of Golden Stone. His grave is here. Nice little spot. Very nearly at his anniversary of his death for Brian Jones. So Brian Jones is just over my shoulder. I'll have a little walk and finish the story. Brian Jones wasn't, as I said, he's questionable character is the phrase I'm going with. He broke the jaw of his partner at the time, a model. I might be getting his girlfriends mixed up. I'll put her name. Apologies, I can't remember. Again, not done any research. Going by memory. And yeah, broke a jaw if I remember, like horrendous. And she went off with Keith Richards. And fair play to Keith Richards, he does sound like a cool dude. Like Keith Richards, and I mean, who am I to pass that kind of opinion? And he took it, and they ended up being together for a little while. So imagine the tension. And Brian Jones was coming to a point where he could barely play anymore. There's a documentary where you see the Rolling Stones making one of the songs, I think it's Sympathy for the Devil, and he's barely there. He's there, but he's not. And yeah, he was ousted from the band, and I mean, they were his band. He named them, he found them, and he was losing control. He was losing all this. And Jagger and Richards were the Rolling Stones. They are the Rolling Stones, and he could see that. And to be fired from your band, that must be heartbreaking. And by all accounts, he was heartbroken. He lost the Rolling Stones, and not long after, he was found dead at the bottom of his pool in A.A. Milne's house, the Winnie the Pooh house, which I might get to one day, but I think the original report was that he died by drowning, and then it was changed to misdemeanor or something. He was found to have an enlarged heart and some enlarged organs from all his drug and alcohol use. And so the early Rolling Stones stuff, like the harmonica on Not Fade Away, that was Brian Jones, and all the slide guitar on their early stuff. But I am told that slide guitar that you think is probably the easiest form, you just get a glass bottle, anybody can do it. But to actually be decent, to make it sound good, is one of the hardest forms of guitar to play. And Brian Jones was the best at slide guitar. He's brilliant. My favourite Rolling Stones album is Between the Buttons. Mother's Little Helper is one of my favourite Stones tunes. Ruby Tuesday is one of my favourite Stones tunes. Now, Ruby Tuesday is a Keith Richards song. Richards, Jagger, they all are, but I think it was his lyric and everything. But there's lots of stories about how it was a Brian Jones tune, and he worked hard with Keith Richards with the melody. Brian Jones, of course, plays the recorder. Anything interesting on those Rolling Stones tunes that aren't guitar, like aren't rock and roll bass drums, guitars, vocals, normally are Brian Jones, and they're incredibly interesting. They use lots of different things. Again, I don't know if time is telling the story different, but I always was led to believe that Brian Jones was pushing the Rolling Stones to use sitar in a song because it was a cool instrument. It's a cool instrument, and the Rolling Stones were pushing back, going, "We don't want to be too weird." Then the Beatles did Norwegian Wood, and then the Rolling Stones did Painted Black. I don't know if that story in the delves of my mind is incorrect, but that's how I always learnt it. Brian Jones wanted weirder and weirder instruments, and he played that weird marimba thing on Under My Thumb. He played one of his last great contributions to the Rolling Stones is No Expectations. Is that the song? I'm sure it is. I think that's off Let It Bleed. I'm going to say Let It Bleed. I'll put it up if I'm wrong. Rolling Stones aren't my biggest love, I'll be honest with you. I do love them more than most, but yeah, they're not my biggest love. Hence, I can't remember what song No Expectations is from. I'm sure it's Let It Bleed. He played the slide guitar on that, which is blimmin' awesome. That tune's great. The Rolling Stones are great. I love the Rolling Stones more than most people, but yeah, that period of the Rolling Stones, they are Jagger Richards songs. I just think, like George Martin kind of made Beatles songs interesting, more interesting, if they could be more interesting. Brian Jones kind of made Rolling Stones tunes more interesting to me. But he tragically passed away in July the 3rd, 1969. Here I am, and I think it'll be his anniversary on Tuesday. A week today, I think, is his anniversary. His death is marred in controversy. There's lots of murder theories. I hate when people have these crazy theories that they forget that, you know, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are actually real people, and they probably hear these things. It must be flipping awful. There are murder theories, lots of theories about his death, but it's also interesting to think that Brian Jones dying was kind of like the death of the 60s as well. You can easily attribute him dying was kind of the end of that phase of hippies and peace and love, man. He died in 1969, and then following, I mean, Jim Morrison was a couple of years later. Then some of those great 60s stars just passed. Jimi Hendrix. It's weird to think that Jim Morrison died after Brian Jones. I found that really weird. There's a poem he wrote about Brian, an ode to LA, whilst thinking about Brian Jones. But it's weird to think that Jim Morrison outliving people. That's really weird to me. One of the weirdest Jim Morrison things is, tangent, he was a big fan of Pink Floyd, Jim Morrison. He never heard Dark Side of the Moon. Isn't that weird? Brian Jones featured on a Beatles track. My love for the Beatles, I will include the Beatles. There's stories about how Brian Jones and John Lennon are very good friends. They were going to occur after he was fired by the Stones. He fired from the Rolling Stones, and he died like a month or something later, very quick. He wanted to get a group of John Lennon together, and Brian Jones had that Beatles song he featured on You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, quite a obscure Beatles track really. So I think the B-side to Let It Be, you know me number one, you know me number two, you know me number three, and you know me number four. So one of the worst Lennon McCartney songs in my opinion. But John Lennon wanted that to be the first single of the Plastic Ono Band. People know that. Imagine if that was the first song. I think it's Cold Turkey it ends up being. But imagine if Brian Jones and John Lennon got together. I think the Rolling Stones were saying towards the end of Brian Jones, when he wasn't horrible to be around and he wasn't being mean and nasty and cruel and just horrible, he just never wanted to play guitar anymore. He just wanted weirder and weirder instruments, which I think is kind of cool. I mean, imagine that contributing with John Lennon. I think that would have been, just a year of that would have been awesome. But they probably would have come out with You Know My Name, Look Up the Number instead of, I don't know, Working Class Hero, which is one of John Lennon's first solo tunes. But he played saxophone on the Beatles track, Tangent again. This is why I didn't do any research, because I knew I would talk a lot. But that's by far the best bit of the song is saxophone playing. Brian Jones can play everything. Saxophone's so hard to play. And there's stories, I mean, why John Lennon and Brian Jones probably would have been ace together. The stories you hear about Beatles tracks that John Lennon would just go away in a corner and he'd write a tune. Nothing that would blow your socks off Beatle-wise, but he would write a song that you would all know. I think I'll Cry Instead was written by John Lennon in like 3 minutes or something. And there's stories, and I don't know if they're true, but Brian Jones would go off in a corner with an instrument he'd never picked up before and give him an hour, he could get a tune out of it. That's just genius. That's just, who can do that? But imagine them two had got together. The amount of creativity that was about in the 60s and 70s music-wise, insane. So yeah, I'll walk away from Brian Jones's grave now. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope I've given a fair portrayal of the Rolling Stones are nothing without Jagger and Richards, I know that. But that period where Brian Jones was like let loose with any instrument he could get his hand on is my favourite. I just find it so much more interesting. Like Exile on Main Street's not my bag really. I prefer Aftermath and Between the Buttons. And yeah, but he was a questionable person. I mean, he did lots of things. I mean, we all have regrets, I guess. But when he was using, he just sounded like he was just horrible to Mick Jagger, horrible to Keith Richards, horrible to Bill Wyman, just horrible to them all. They all say he was horrible. I was talking to, last thing I'll say, I was talking to one of my friends. She was going to the Foo Fighters at Wembley, and she was saying, oh, it'll be cancelled now, Taylor Hawkins has died, God rest his soul. And I was like, oh, I mean, you might not cancel. I mean, Brian Jones died, and 2 days later the Rolling Stones played a massive gig in Hyde Park. And she just couldn't get her head around that the Rolling Stones would play a gig, and the Rolling Stones famously played a gig. It was to introduce their new guitarist who was replacing Brian Jones, Mick Taylor's first gig, and it ended up being dedicated to Brian Jones. But 2 days after he died, and I think it wouldn't happen these days, would it? I think like people these days are wanting to be outraged about something, so something, I don't think there was any kickback whatsoever to the Stones playing that gig. I might be wrong, but nowadays there would be. But also, this is a long video. Brian Jones is not attributed to writing any songs in the Rolling Stones back catalogue. Mick Jagger has famously said, I've never met anybody with an ability less to write songs, or like he had no. Mick Jagger was very damning. He said he just could not write anything. He just could not write a song. But one of the Rolling Stones songs, I don't know if you ever know this, but the Rolling Stones, they did the Rice Krispies jingle in the 60s. And that's the Rolling Stones. I'll play that. Wake up in the morning, there's a snap around the place. Wake up in the morning, there's a crackle in your face. Wake up in the morning, there's a pop that really says Rice Krispies to you. And the song, the jingle, has Brian Jones writing credit on it. And Jagger and Richards weren't happy because we all contributed. We should have the songwriting credits. You're about to write I Can't Get No Satisfaction, Street Fighting Man, Sympathy for the Devil. You can't always get what you want. Get Off My Cloud. I don't know, Under My Thumb, Ruby Tuesday, Brown Sugar, massive, great songs ever. And at one point they were arguing about the Rice Krispies jingle songwriting credit. Man, if they only knew what was going to happen. Anyway, that's the end for me. Long video. I can talk more when it's better weather. Hope you've enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. Don't know where I'm going next. Might be a while until I do my next one. But thank you for watching. Peace.